All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August 18th, 2024 edition of the monthly program meeting that we have here with the East Central Ohio, what is it?
Technology Users Club.
Technology User Club, otherwise known as
EcoTuck.
or Licking County Computer Society. This month, we're very grateful to have a special guest speaker who goes by the name of Joe Kissel. He's the publisher of Take Control, which is a popular series of books. He's written over 60 books about technology total. He formerly wrote for publications such as Macworld, Wirecutter, and Tidbits. He lives in Saskatoon with his wife and their two sons. He's here to be presenting on the topic of your digital legacy. So, Joe, if you're ready, we're ready, sir.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I can see some of you. Some of you are this big, probably smaller than in real life, I'm guessing. And as I look at the people that I can make out, the vast majority up here, I'm guessing to be older than me. I'm 57.
Yep.
And I see, grayer hairs than mine, and mine's not dark. And this is sort of the typical user group demographic. I have spoken to, I've lost track. I'm sure more than 100 user groups in very many different places, in England and all over the United States. And I've been doing this for, speaking to user groups for probably 30 years. And this has always been the demographic. But nowadays it's as I'm sure you all know, harder to get younger people interested. Well, I would go to these groups back in the days when most of my presentations were in person and I could actually see the expressions on your face and know whether you're laughing at my jokes. I would go to these user groups to talk about whatever. I would talk about backups or passwords or some sort of tech topic. And people would come up to me after the presentation. They say, well, Joe, that was very interesting and everything, but I'm fill in the blank with their age. I'm 85 or I'm 90 or some age. And at this point in my life, I'm not worried about keeping up with all the latest gadgets, operating systems. At this point in my life, I'm worried about what is going to happen to my data, my accounts, my backups, my other stuff after I'm gone. And people kept saying this to me. I'm like, well, now that I think about it, I wasn't thinking about that, but now that I think about it, that is actually a very important thing to be concerned about. And regardless of your age, of course, but especially as you get older, it's very important to figure out what's going to happen to your data after you die. And so I wrote a book about it. And that was the first version of that book came out in, I think, 2017. And then I just updated it with a big new edition early this year. And the book is called Take Control of Your Digital Legacy. So what we're going to do today is give you a sort of excerpt or overview of that book. I can't possibly tell you everything that's in the book today, but I'm going to do as much as I can, and then I'm going to encourage you to pick up a copy of the book for all the remaining details. So, we are talking about death, okay? And that's not the most cheery subject to be talking about on a Sunday afternoon, but the way I look at it is the more of this kind of stuff that you think about and prepare for in advance, the fewer things you have to worry about. And worrying about fewer things is always a great idea. So I hope that you will find this the most interesting, most exciting and funniest presentation on death you've heard possibly ever. So I'm going to share my screen here. And as I do that, I'm going to ask you if your microphone is not already muted, please mute it. And at the end of the presentation, I will ask for questions, and anyone who has a question at that time can unmute themselves. So let me just arrange my windows here because Zoom likes to do weird things to them. Okay, so the here we go. Let's just do that. Okay, I'm still hearing some noise from someone.
It's probably the room mic is unmuted here.
My screen went blank, so I have to figure out what's.
And it's acting up because I can't even mute it.
Okay. Well, if it is possible to figure out how to mute that, that would be great because the sounds will be distracting as we go. All right. So again, my name is Joe Kissel. We're going to talk about your digital legacy. This being the 21st century, we have ads. You know, we start and end with commercials. So what I'm advertising is the book that this presentation is based on. This is what it looks like. It's an ebook, of course, normally $15, but we have a discount for user groups. So you're going to want to make a note of that coupon code. You can screenshot it or take a photo or jot it down. And you can use that to save 30% on any Take Control books now or in the future. Besides getting an ebook, when you buy this, you will get another file. It's a template you can fill in for a digital will, which is something I'm going to be talking about in just a few minutes. This will make it a lot easier for you to go through the process that I'm going to describe. And as I said earlier, although I will cover as much as I can in the next, 45 minutes or so, I cannot possibly get into all the topics or all the details in the book. So to learn the full details, you really need to have everything in front of you. So I hope you will take advantage of that. Now, I love this billboard, and there was a moment in my life when that could have been my will. We're talking about what's going to happen to your digital stuff later on. Now, on my mom's side of the family, they've always been like really interested in genealogy. So we have family records going back many, many generations. And I can tell you exactly when so-and-so's great-great-grandfather immigrated from England or Scotland or wherever it might have been. And keeping records was a really big deal. Having family reunions, really big deal. Everybody kind of cared about history. On my dad's side of the family, complete opposite. Nobody cared about any of that stuff. The past is the past. We don't think about it. We don't talk about it. We don't care about it. So as a result, when I try to find out about my grandfather who died a few months before I was born, or his parents, or their parents, I have very little information. I have seen exactly one photograph of my paternal great-grandparents. I don't know if I know that they were born in Lithuania. I don't know if they spoke English. I don't know if they were nice people, although I have some reason to believe that they weren't. I don't know really anything about them. And boy, I wish I knew. I wish I knew more than just like date of birth and death for my ancestors. Well, I contrast that with me today. So I'm standing in front of a computer that has, I don't know, 3 or 4 million files on it, including a couple hundred gigabytes of photographs and videos. Some of them are photos and videos of me. Some of them are photos and videos that I've taken. Everything that I've ever written, which is a lot, all of the email I've sent and received for the past several decades, and tons and tons of other information about me. So if my kids, as they get older, are ever curious about my background or anything that happened to me, there is tons of data available to them. And if their eventual hypothetical kids or grandkids in the future, or, you know, historians documenting the great minds of the 21st century, if somebody ever cares, well, there's loads more data about me, data that I really wish I could have about my ancestors. The only problem is the fact that it's on this computer here does not somehow magically make it available to those hypothetical future people. I've got to do stuff now to make sure that the right data gets to the right people in the right formats in the right way, and that it's actually preserved. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Assuming you are of sound mind and body, this is the right time for you to figure out what should happen to your data and write it all down. If you don't write it down, then someone else is going to make those decisions for you. And the decision they make might not be what you would want. The decision they make might be, let's just throw it all out, or who knows. So I want to empower you to make your own decisions about your own data. Now, of course, part of the reason we're doing this is for the long distant future. Yes, your children, grandchildren, and so forth. We are talking about legacy in that sense, posterity. But backing up a bit from that, let's suppose that you walk out, excuse me, walk out the door tomorrow morning, and quite unexpectedly, you get hit by a bus. Sudden death could happen to any of us for any of numerous reasons at any time. One of my colleagues, another author in the Take Control series, who is, I'm guessing, 15 years younger than me, died a few months ago of an aneurysm. He had no family history. Nobody was expecting it. And he was, a very well-known person and very active. And one day, all of a sudden, he wasn't there anymore. So I'm very conscious of the fact that despite our best efforts to stay healthy and do all the right things, something could happen at any time. And when that happens, your friends and your family will, of course, be grieving, but at the same time that they're grieving, they are going to have to take care of stuff. And this is especially true if they don't have time to plan for it. They're going to have to pay bills and settle your estate and deal with online accounts and figure out insurance and 100 other things. Turns out that the kind of stuff we're going to do that will be for the long term can also help in the immediate aftermath of your death if it were to happen a lot sooner and more suddenly than you're expecting. Backing up even further from that, let's say you live for another 20, 30, 50 years. Hey, great. But you might want to go on vacation for a month somewhere, and somebody else is going to house sit for you. Or you might get sick, be in the hospital for a while. It's okay, you recover, but while you're out of commission, again, somebody else has to take care of business. So once again, the stuff that we are collecting and writing down will help even even long before you die if you just need somebody else to take care of some stuff for a while. So we're doing this, yes, for the very, very, very long term, also for the medium and short term. Now, I'd like to think that the mere fact that I have this computer here with all this stuff on it would be enough, and somehow that stuff would just survive and the data would go in the right places. It won't, though, and I'll give you a few reasons. One of them is encryption. Now, I'm a big fan of strong encryptions and using long, unique, random passwords everywhere. And I've written a few books on that topic, but using good passwords and encrypting stuff helps to keep you safe right now from people that want to steal your identity, people that want to steal your money, people who want to advertise stuff to you. You know, there are all kinds of people out there that would really, really like to have anything from your bank account number to your social security number to a list of the sites you visit online. And so encryption can help with that quite a bit. There's a little catch, though, and that is if everything that you interact with on your computer is encrypted and you are the only person who knows the password that decrypts it, and that's stored only in your head, well, once your head stops being functional, you're kind of out of luck. Or should I say, your spouse, children, other people who might need to get at that data at that point would be out of luck. So encryption is great, but it's also a double-edged sword. Then there are file formats. Now, there are lots of file formats that we all use every day, you know, the Microsoft formats, .docx and XLSX and, you know, PDF and .txt and JPEGs and PNGs and so forth. So there are many, many file formats that we all just use that are very, very common. We never even think about them. But I have been around in the computing world for long enough to see some very, very popular file formats fade away. And I have known people that built up large amounts of data using, you know, over many years using apps that then were discontinued. And then as time went by, it became harder and harder to even find apps that could open, you know, other apps that could open those old files or translate them into some more useful format. And this is only going to happen more. Even if you've been using a computer for 50 years, take a look at how much things have changed in that period of time. And now imagine we're 50 years, 100 years, 150 years in the future, and imagine how much more things can change then. So even though you might feel comfortable with something like a .docx file for text, there's no guarantee that that file format will be readable in 50 years. Then there's the media that we store our files on. Most of us nowadays probably have computers with SSDs instead of mechanical hard drives. You might still use a mechanical hard drive for backups or for extra storage. SSDs are not 100% of what people are using today, but they're very common. But let's say that you are rooting around in your attic or basement and you find a box and, you know, blow the dust off of it. And what is it? Oh, wow. It's a floppy disk. Not even a little one. Maybe it's one of the bigger ones or one of the much bigger ones. And oh, I remember this. This was back from when I was in, you know, and I made this thing. And oh, this wouldn't it be so cool to go and look at that data that I put on that floppy disk decades ago? Well, you're gonna have a few challenges. One is, can you even find a floppy drive of the correct size that is able to connect to the computer that you have today. That could be a challenge. You can find USB 3.5-inch floppy drives. They're not very common. They exist. Try to find a USB compatible 5 to 8 inch floppy drive. Lots of luck. And not just floppy disks either. Zip drives and jazz drives and various kinds of DAT drive, tape drives, all that kind of stuff. Over time, uh, media formats go out of fashion and it becomes harder and harder to find a device that can even read those. But let's say you did find that device or you used 8 different adapters in a row, and finally you got that old floppy drive hooked up to your modern computer. Now you put that disk in. Unfortunately, it's not readable. You might think, but it's little pieces of rust, it's little magnetically charged particles. What can go wrong? Well, I mean, heat, cold, humidity, dryness, uh, cosmic rays. I mean, all kinds of stuff can physically damage not just magnetic media, but even optical disks. Even hard drives and SSDs. You put them lovingly on a shelf in a closet and you go back a couple of years later, try to see what's on them. Maybe nothing. Maybe they have become unreadable. So just dealing with how hardware and the media that you store your data on can degrade over time is an issue. And then there's finding stuff. Now, if you use a Windows PC, it of course has a built-in search feature. If you use a Mac, it has built-in search feature called Spotlight. Microsoft and Apple want you to not care about what you name things or where you put them. You just have a file. And when you need that file, no problem. You open up the search window and you start typing. You type the name of the file or some words that are inside it someplace, and it'll just find it by searching the content. So that's fine as long as you know what you're searching for. But what if somebody puts a computer on your desk that has millions of files on it and says, hey, this computer was left to me by a much older relative who just died. Go see if you can find anything useful on it. Now, unbeknownst to you, that relative had written the Great American Novel, an outstanding piece of literature, which, if it were found and published, would rock the literary world for decades. It's there someplace, but you don't know that it's there. You don't know that this person has created this wonderful work of art. So you're probably not going to individually examine millions of files, no matter how much you may have cared about or loved that person. That's just not a realistic thing for someone to do. You might get lucky and stumble across it. Then again, you might not. Now, if you knew what to look for, you could use that search feature and say, oh, well, I know the name of some character in this novel, or I know a place where it was set, or something that I can search on. But if you don't know what to search for, you got nothing. And it gets even worse if you're looking for images that don't have searchable metadata. Well, you might know that there was an image of something that was taken in Florida, but how do you find that among potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of images? So these are some of the things that are problems with just leaving your computer to someone that we need to solve. So here's what we're going to do. Step one is to take an inventory. Not an inventory like you see on your screen here, not like going through an Indiana Jones style warehouse and opening every box. No, I'm talking about a much higher level thing. We want to write down what we have that is most interesting or most important. And I'm talking about, to start off with, I'm talking about broad categories. Not every single file, not every single photo, not even close, because look, no matter how old or young you are, life is too short. What we're looking for is broad categories that capture the most important stuff and highlights what you have that somebody else might care about. Now, to do this, I'm going to suggest creating a document that I call a digital will. Now, you should have a regular, conventional legal will, a will that describes what is going to happen to your money and your financial and physical assets after you die. If you don't already have a will, I really recommend going and talking to an estate planner kind of right away. That's a good idea for everyone to have a will. But most of the time, wills stop at physical and financial assets. Most of the time, wills do not specify what's going to happen to your photos that are on your computer or your emails or your digital accounts. So on the theory that your regular will doesn't already cover this because it most likely does not, we're going to create a supplemental document that is a will for your digital stuff. One of the things that this will include is an inventory, but quite simply, your digital will says, here's the stuff I have in digital format, and here's what I want to have done with it. Just like in a conventional will. Well, I want my photos to go to this person, and I want my documents to go to this person, and so forth. Now, the great thing about digital assets is that you don't have to give them to just one person. It's not like a house that there's only one of. You could make 1,000 copies of your digital photos. You could say, well, I want every single relative, friend, and neighbor to get a copy of this stuff. And I want for everyone except cousin so-and-so to get a copy of this stuff. Okay, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to write down what you have and what you want to have done with it. Kinds of things we're going to inventory include online accounts. That could be things like social media, Facebook, Instagram, any kind of things like that that you use. It could also be, do you use an online service to manage your passwords? Or do you use an online service of some kind to store files or to share stuff? Any kind of online account you may have that actually holds something useful and important would go in the inventory. Your media. So like here I have a little external SSD that I use for backups and so forth. If you have external hard drives, SSDs, magnetic media, optical media, that'll go on the list. But also digital media. And we're going to be talking a little bit later on about things like movies and TV shows and music that you may have downloaded. But you need to kind of make a record of what all digital assets you have, and that would be included. Photos, of course, are going to be a big topic, and I'll talk about photos in just a bit. And then there's kind of everything else. And I don't mean to kind of say, well, it's just the miscellaneous things that aren't that important. This could be the biggest and most important category for you. I know it is for me. All of my all the things that I've ever written, these 60 plus books, and everything going back to high school term papers, it's quite a lot and would be quite useful and interesting, I think, to my heirs and other people. Any kind of documents you may have, any other sorts of data will have to be accounted for. Whoops, the wrong button. Okay. So what we're going to be doing in the next half hour or so is drilling down into various categories of these things that you're going to inventory and talking about what some of the decisions are you might make about what will happen to them. But before we get to those details, you are going to want to think through some high-level things that will inform all those other specific categories. And the first, and arguably, well, maybe the most important, maybe the second most important, is what to preserve and what to discard. Now, I feel like this deserves a little bit of explanation because, broadly speaking, there are two kinds of computer users. There are, at one extreme, digital pack rats, and on the other extreme, digital minimalists. And of course, in reality, we all exist somewhere along a spectrum in between. But let's just say there are those people who habitually save everything, every email they ever get, every document they come across, everything they download, every email, they just save it because, hey, why not? I have plenty of storage space. You never know. I might need that someday. There are other people who are like, okay, I looked at the thing, I'm done with it, delete it. Don't, don't keep anything you're not absolutely sure you don't need. There are some problems with either extreme. Okay, so if you're the digital pack rat type, a problem with that is kind of the signal to noise ratio. Again, if somebody is looking at your stuff, trying to figure out what they might care about or what they might need to preserve, it's a lot easier for them to go through 1,000 things than 1,000,000 things. And the more stuff you have, the harder they're going to have to dig to find those needles in that big haystack. On the other extreme, if you just delete everything without even thinking about it, you are going to leave very little for other people to get that sort of information that I wish I had about my ancestors. It might not seem important to you now, but it might seem important to somebody else later. So if you happen to find yourself at one of those extremes, I'm going to really urge you to sort of come closer to the center and don't save absolutely everything, but also don't discard everything. You get to decide, well, I'm definitely going to keep all of my photos, but maybe I'm not going to keep my email or whatever it might be. You can decide what sorts of things you want to preserve and what sorts of things you want to discard. But a word of warning. Anything that still exists on your computer, and of course, not just your computer, your phone, tablet, whatever, any of your devices, when you're gone, could basically become public, all right? So if you have things that you would rather that nobody else see or nobody else know about you after you're gone, you really ought to probably take care of those beforehand. Now, I was giving this presentation, a version of this presentation to a senior citizen group in San Diego several years ago. And the guy sitting in the front row, he's like, well, I just want to know how to keep my wife from finding out about all my porn. And I'm like, well, how do you answer a question like that? I mean, one approach would be not to have any. I mean, just if you want to get really crazy. But like I without passing any particular judgments, you might have stuff, old love letters from someone who's not your spouse, or who knows what stuff that might incriminate somebody in something. Like you might have stuff on your computer that, as long as you are actively protecting it, is just fine. But if someone else were to lay their hands on it, would result in consequences, might result in consequences that would reflect poorly upon your legacy for your children and grandchildren, etc. So I'm kind of just saying, if you have stuff like that and you want to be sure that it won't fall into those hands, you should really take care of it yourself rather than relying on someone else to do that later. That said, the someone else is going to be a person I call your digital executor. Now, with a regular will, what happens is you've died, and now someone has to go through and settle your accounts. You will have debts, perhaps, that have to be paid off, taxes that have to be paid. And once all those legal obligations are fulfilled, then your executor is going to take whatever's left and divide that up amongst the people you designate as best they can. Now, if you say, I want to leave, $50,000 to the International Stop Continental Drift Society, and it turns out that once all your debts are paid, there's only $20 left, well, tough luck. The executor can only work with what you actually have left. But their job is to follow the instructions in your will as best they can, given the situation. A digital executor needs to do the same thing, except for your data. So they need to be able to say, well, Joe said he wanted to leave these photos to this person, but in order for me to get those photos to that person, I have to figure out what file formats they can read, what sort of media they can use, how to get that stuff onto that media and into that person's possession. And there might be quite a lot of decisions like this. So the person who's doing this job needs to be someone who is technically clueful. Okay, they need to know their way around file formats and cloud storage and all those kinds of things. And also someone you can trust. Someone that you know will give the right things to the right people and will keep the other things out of those people's hands. Even though you do and should trust this person, there's nothing saying that, before they take over the job, someone else might have access to your computer. And that's why I said the thing before about discarding anything that you don't want them to see. Okay. But the digital executor is going to do the best they can to get those digital assets into the right places. Talked about file formats before. I want to say just another thing about them. I did some research to find out what archivists and historians and libraries and museums thought about digital file formats, because I wanted to make good recommendations. If you want to preserve a text file or a photo or a movie or whatever it is for posterity, what's the best format to put it in? And as I read about a lot of these institutions and what their policies were, I discovered a few things. One thing is that they all say it's better to use an open file format than a proprietary file format. So they would all say that something like PDF is better than something like Microsoft Word, because even though PDF started as an Adobe standard, it became an open standard. And so the specification is out there and anyone can write software that reads PDF files. Whereas for Microsoft Word or Excel or PowerPoint or whatever, those file formats are under Microsoft's control. So to the extent that you can use open file formats, that's better. Also, this is a little bit painful to say, they disprefer file formats that include compression. And their reasoning is 50 or 100 or 200 years from now, who knows what the world is going to look like, what tools will or won't be available. But if you want to be very pessimistic and say, it's Planet of the Apes or something, the tools available to read and decode old documents might be less sophisticated than what we have now. When stuff is compressed, that makes it that much harder to figure out what it really was. Puts another barrier in the way of decoding it. So, for an example, when it comes to photographs, we all use JPEG and PNG. But these are formats that, I mean, they're great because they're very, very heavily compressed. That makes the files very small. What the professionals recommend is uncompressed TIFF. TIFF, that's tagged image file format. And there are compressed versions of TIFF, and then there's uncompressed TIFF. And the professionals say that the uncompressed TIFF files are the most likely to be readable in the distant future. Problem is, uncompressed TIFF files are gigantic. I mean, really, really big. You probably, if you have a couple hundred gigabytes of photos now, and if you were to convert all of those to uncompressed TIFF, you'd need to buy several very large hard drives to store all that stuff. It's really not practical to put all your photos in that format. So you need to kind of think through, weigh the pros and cons and the risks, and decide what file formats you're going to use for different kinds of data. And you might not use this for absolutely every file you create or save. You might use it only for a particular subset of files that you're going to lovingly care for and send off into the future, but you have to make those decisions. Now, almost everyone who uses any sort of digital device has one, two, or three of these accounts. You might have an Apple account, you might have a Google account, you might have a Microsoft account, you might have two of those or all three of them. And even if you're, let's say you're a Mac user, you're going to have an Apple account, sure, but most Mac users also have Google accounts because most people also use Google's products and services. And a great many Mac users also use Microsoft Office and other Microsoft tools. So I personally have all three accounts, and you might also, depending on what kinds of stuff you do with your technology. These three accounts together are going to control quite a lot of your data. Now, an example would be you create a document in Google Docs, and there isn't a copy of it on your hard drive or SSD. There is no local copy at all. The only copy of that is in the cloud. So all three of these companies have stuff that is stored only in the cloud, and then they also have stuff that might be synced. It stores in the cloud, but also on your device. But they're going to control, in one way or another, a lot of your data. So you should really know how to deal with their stuff. Now, I go into fair detail in the book, and I'm looking at the clock and seeing, oh my goodness, I have been so long-winded. We're going to have to kind of zip through some of this stuff. For Apple, they do have a program called Legacy Contacts. And these are basically people that you set up right now to give access to a lot of your Apple data after you've died. You have to set it up in advance, but once you've designated a person as being allowed to get at that data later on, they have to just present Apple with a death certificate, and then they're in. If you share your Apple data with other people in your family, as long as they are still alive, they will be able to continue accessing the shared bits. Google has something that's I think really even better. It's an inactive account manager. You go in and you say, all right, after this period of time has elapsed, I want you, Google, to send me a reminder. Hey, Joe, are you still alive? And if I say, yeah, I'm still alive, great, that resets the counter. But if after a few reminders, a few attempts to contact me by email, by text message, whatever, if those fail, then Google is going to conclude that I am no longer actively using my brain. So at that point, you will have set up your preferences. Well, at that point, I want you, Google, to give access to my Gmail account to this person, and I want to give access to my Google Photos to these three people, and I want to give access to this stuff to these people. So you set up all those connections the way you want them, and when the time comes, that happens. Then there's Microsoft. And I mean, Microsoft is one of the top 3 biggest companies in the world. They've been doing this stuff for a long time, and their solution to giving somebody else access to your data after you've died is, well, I hope you left them your username and password so that they can log in as you. That's it. And like I have no words. I cannot fathom that a company with the size and technical acumen of Microsoft can't come up with as good of a solution as Google and Apple can. But there you are. So photos. Now, there are, of course, your digital photos, and those are comparatively easy to handle. You might use Photos app or some third-party app on your computer to organize your photos, or they might just all be sitting in a big folder someplace. If you use some app and you have albums or categories or tags or labels or whatever the organizational mechanism is that you happen to use, just write that down. Write a few sentences that explain, okay, my photos are organized like this, just to give somebody else a little bit of help to track down what they might be looking for. It'd be really, really helpful if you said, okay, I'm going to spend a few hours going through my photos and picking out just the very, very, very most important ones to set aside in a special way so that nobody really has to go through tens or hundreds of thousands of photos. They could just pay attention to those ones I've set aside. Now, when you're setting aside photos, I want you to keep in mind that even though you might have thought it was fantastic to take 500 photos of the Grand Canyon, your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren do not care. They can already find thousands of photos of the Grand Canyon online. They don't care about your photos. What your loved ones will care about is photos of you, right? So you at the Grand Canyon, that's interesting. Better yet, you and them together in front of the Grand Canyon, much, much better. So you want to focus on the photos that contain you, that contain your family members, ideally both together, the selfies, things where you put a camera on a tripod and did a, time shot. Those are going to be the most useful to other people. If you have, like I have, tens of thousands of photos, I really don't expect or want you to look at every single one and say, should I keep this one? Like, you have other things to do with your life. So I want you to skim through them quickly and pick out the ones that you think someone else will care about the most. It could be that you have a box or some other container that has paper photos or slides or negatives that were never digitized, that do not exist in your photo library on your computer. And if so, this would be a really good time to digitize those, because sure, you can pass on that box of old photos to someone else. They could be damaged by heat, humidity, time, fire, flood, whatever. They could be lost. The more things you can add to your digital archive, the better chance they have at long-term survival. Now, if you have a couple hundred, then easy to deal with. If you have thousands and thousands, you might want to sort them and prioritize them to figure out which ones you're actually going to worry about first, if at all. If you've got a scanner and you know how to use it, well, you pop a photo in, you scan it, lather, rinse, repeat. But if you have a lot of photos, or if you just find that process of scanning to be way too tedious, you might want to outsource scanning. Now, outsourcing scanning could take a couple of forms. If you have a child, grandchild, niece, nephew, neighbor, old enough to like know how to use technology, young enough to be bribed with a nice plate of hot cookies, let's say, then you say, would you do your poor old grandpa, neighbor, uncle a huge favor and just scan this box of photos for me? Oh, sure, Uncle Joe. I'd be happy to as long as you keep feeding me. Well, that's one way to do it. If the bribery doesn't work, there are lots of companies out there that you can send that box to, and they'll scan them, charge you some number of cents or dollars per image, depending on, do you want it extra high resolution? Do you want it to be retouched and, all those fancy things? And then they'll either send you a download link or maybe send them to you on a flash drive or a DVD-ROM or something. If you're doing it yourself, well, I guess this also applies if somebody else is doing them for you. But usually when you scan a document, an image, it's going to come out with a name like 2024 underscore 08 underscore 18 underscore the time, dot PDF or dot something. And that tells you when the thing was scanned, but it tells you nothing else about it. It doesn't tell you anything about when it was taken or who's in it. And so that's not terribly helpful. Now, I have a friend who was the designated archivist for his extended family. All of his relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews would bring over huge plastic bins. He had a whole wall of his office just filled floor to ceiling with these gigantic plastic bins, all full of photographs. His job was to scan them all. Oh boy. And so he would scan as many as he could. And every year at Christmas, he would send out a CD to the whole family with that year's, scanned photos. Now, this guy is a computer programmer. So I'm like, with all these tens of thousands of photos, how did you deal with this naming convention? And I'm thinking he probably whipped up some really fancy custom database with lots of, metadata and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, no. What I did was I took a plain text file, notepad, text edit, whatever, plain text. My scanner spits out an image, gives me the name, copy it, paste it into that file. Don't rename it. I let the name be what it is. Press return. Look at the photograph. If I can recognize any person or place in that, I type in the name. If I know when it was taken, I type in the date. Anything written on the back, type that in. That's it. Press return again, repeat with the next one. So he ends up with this gigantic text file, just gigantic, that has just the name of the file and then a few words or a sentence or two about what's in it. He's like, this is a beautiful thing, because 100 years from now, anybody in the world can open up a plain text document and go find and type in somebody's name, and it'll find that name in that text file and say, oh, well, this person was in the photo with this name. Then you just go look at that photo, right? So technically a flat file database, but I mean, it's low tech, but it's simple. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and it is basically future-proof. So that would be my recommendation. Even though you do this, you should still keep the originals, because like it tickles me that I still have a paper copy of my dad's 12th grade report card showed him getting a D in French. Boy, could I have used that when I was in 12th grade. But they're, having the originals of documents. And by the way, I'm not just talking about photos here. Report cards, sure. Marriage licenses, titles to property, ticket stubs, theater programs, whatever, any kind of document that you might have. It's really cool to be able to touch the original, and you might be able to find something by looking at the original that a scan wouldn't show you. So I do recommend hanging on to those. All right, I mentioned passwords before, and what I really want to say about passwords now is just this. Use a password manager. I have, I don't know, a couple thousand passwords, and I don't know what they are. I have memorized maybe 5 or 6 of them. I put a gun to my head. I don't know what the others are. I never even glanced at them because when a site asks me to create a password, I just have my password manager generate one and store it. And then the next time I try to log in, it just autofills it. And I don't even see what the password is. I just see like the little dots, right? So it's really much more convenient for me because all I really have to remember is that one master password that unlocks all the rest. So I use a password manager to manage all my passwords. And the great thing about this is that instead of passing on hundreds of passwords and recording all those tediously in your digital will, you could just say, okay, here's where you find my vault that contains my passwords. It might be an online account, or it might be a file on your computer. And here's the password that unlocks them all. Done. And some password managers even have sort of digital legacy features built in that will share your stuff with other people in various ways. I happen to use 1Password. That's my favorite password manager. But whichever one you happen to use, it will help you with this tremendously. Now, if you do have many, many passwords, it would be a good idea, just like you did with your photos, to say, okay, yeah, but you don't really need to know all of these. Here are the accounts that I actively use and that have stuff in them that you should care about. Make sure your digital executor knows where your passwords are, how to get at them. Very important. Nowadays, particularly on Apple and Google operating systems, not as much on Microsoft operating systems, passkeys are becoming a thing. And passkeys basically let you unlock stuff with just fingerprint scan or face scan or whatever, biometrics. I talk about passkeys in the book. Those have to be part of the plan too. You can't really leave your face or your fingers to someone to scan afterwards. So you will have to come up with other ways of dealing with those again, because we're running overtime. You'll have to read the book for that. Email and messages. What I want to say about email is that it's wonderful because it contains so much rich, useful data. My email contains, receipts for everything I've bought and all of my plane tickets and hotel reservations, any place I've traveled for decades. So much useful information. I just want to say, though, if you use Gmail or Outlook.com or Hotmail or whatever, some online email thing where you only access email in a web browser, you're going to want to also download local copies of those messages to put in an archive that will be saved for posterity, because once you're dead, the online account and everything in it could disappear. And of course, you're going to want to note this information in your digital will so your digital executor has access to it. And you want to decide, should your executor put like a permanent out of the office message? Should they shut down the account after a certain period of time? Should they try to reply to people for a while to say that you're gone? Whatever you want to do, make sure you write that down. Same thing applies to text messages, SMS, iMessage, Facebook Messenger, and all the rest. You want to make sure that you have local copies of those and that your executor knows what to do with them. Social media, I'm going to just kind of breeze over real quickly. Do you use Facebook, X, Threads, Blue Sky, Mastodon, those sorts of things? Make sure that you go over those accounts to see whether anything that you've posted there is stuff that you actually care about. If you really don't care about it, leave it. But if you've posted like really important things, photos, text that doesn't exist anywhere else, you need to figure out what should happen with those accounts. And that could be you want your executor to say, okay, sorry to say that John has died. He asked me to post this one last thing in his name, so here are his final words. Okay, so you could do that. Some of these services allow you to archive things online, which is that you sort of lock the account so it won't be active anymore, but it'll still be accessible online. Some of them allow you to download an archive that you can then deal with in whatever way you like. You can ask for someone to delete your account. Might or might not work. If you have an account that is not just yours, but it's for, let's say, a group, a club, a church, something like that, want to make sure that someone else has the credentials to take over that account when you're gone. All right, so you've made your digital will, you've made all these decisions. What do you do? Well, you're going to want to store this data somewhere, and I'm sorry to say that there are no good choices. So yeah, like you could put that stuff on a hard drive or on SSD or on CD-ROMs or what have you, but every form of media that exists has some fault. Like data on any kind of media, whether it's paper or silicon, can degrade over time. So whatever choice you make, I would say choose not just one, choose two. Okay, choose hard drives and optical discs, or try, SSDs and cloud storage. All right. So there exist archival quality optical discs, assuming people can actually find the readers for them in the future, those kinds of things, and those kinds of things, and those kinds of things. There's even a company that will laser etch documents onto a sapphire disk for you, which is supposed to be completely indestructible. You can even drop it in molten lava and it won't be harmed. And best of all, the only technology you need to read that stuff is a good magnifying glass. Of course, these things are outrageously expensive, and they won't do you any good if the thing gets lost. So, all imperfect choices. Whatever media you choose, you're gonna take all those files, the emails and the documents and the photos, and you're gonna copy them all onto this media, which you should store in a cool, dark place away from heat and humidity and magnetic fields and all those kinds of things. Now, I'm going to give you a little tip here. Even if you have two independent copies of your data stored in multiple places, a lot of things could still go wrong with those. So to keep your data alive for a longer period of time, you go to a child, not like one of your children, not like an actual child, but an adult child, okay, or someone else who is, reasonably tech savvy and quite a bit younger than you, and you say you sit there, you say, I need to talk to you about something very serious, and you gotta use that expression that makes it look like this is really, really bad, and you sit them down and you say, how much do you love me? And you have to, you have to sell this, okay? Put on your very best puppy dog eyes. No smirking, okay? You gotta really make them feel like, oh boy, this is serious, and I'm the, my father, grandfather, whoever is going to ask me like a really, really important favor. And they should say, if they really love you, they should say, well, of course, I love you more than pizza itself. I would do anything for you. What do you need? And then you say, do you love me enough to donate just a little 50 gigabyte slice of your computer's storage to hold my digital archive? You know, however much space you actually need. And this is the point where they're going to think about it. They're going to pause because they're not really sure if they love you that much. They're not really sure if they love you enough to have to upgrade to the next biggest size of SSD. But ideally, they will say yes. And you will put an extra copy of your archive on their computer. And what this means is that when they back up their computer, I hope they back it up, your stuff will get backed up with it. When they move from this computer to another one and another one and another one and another, your stuff will get moved along with their stuff so that it's still kept alive and easily accessible. It's not rotting on a shelf someplace. It's kept active along with their other data. Now you do this, and a few years go by, and well, wouldn't you know it, I'm still alive. Lucky me. But stuff has changed in that period of time. So I really recommend that you go back and refresh your archives with new photos and new emails and new documents so that what is there is completely current. Do, of course, also put in your regular will who gets my computer and my tablet and my phone and so forth. That is also very important. So get a container, could be a folder, a box, an envelope, and put the following things in it. Copy of your regular conventional legal will, printed copy of your digital will, instructions like what does the finder do with all of this stuff here, copy of your data archive in whichever media you choose. And I'm going to make two additional and final recommendations. First is write a little document that I call How to Be Me. Now, what I mean by this is that in most households and businesses, for that matter, each person has certain things that they alone have agreed to take responsibility for. So, for example, in my household, I am the person who changes the furnace filters and cleans out the gutters and gets the oil in the car changed, stuff like that. Okay, my wife has her list, but none of this stuff is really rocket science, but it's also stuff that if I were to die suddenly, my wife would not sort of automatically know how to do, or whoever else had to take care of stuff. So if I just wrote up a few sentences, here's how you change the furnace filter. Like it's not a dissertation, it's not a huge, it's like a few sentences or something. You should really clean the gutters at this time of year, and here's how you do it. You should really have the oil changed this often, and here's how you do it. Like simple, brief instructions, but only for the stuff that you are the only person that knows how to do it, stuff that is only in your head. We're talking like a page or two total, okay? This doesn't have to be a book. This is just like a sketch so that those important facts don't have to be figured out again from scratch. Okay, that would be a really kind thing to do. And again, as I said earlier, this is also the kind of stuff you could give to a house sitter or someone that's watching over your stuff when you're laid up for a while. Last but not least, I'm going to recommend you write your own obituary or an autobituary, as it were. In the last few years, I have had quite a few relatives die. Every time someone dies, my mom sends me a newspaper clipping with their obituary. And I'll look at this and I'll go, that's not Uncle Bill. That's not Aunt Gail. Like they got the picture right, they got the name right, but everything else in there does not in any way remind me of the person I knew. It's all boilerplate. Well, this person was, born here in this time and survived by so and so, and whatever, they were a member of this church, or they served in this branch of the military, or they did this as their career. Like, okay, that's all boilerplate stuff, but nobody really cares. Like, what I want to see is, what was that person actually like? What did they care about? What were they like, and what would they want other people to know about them? And like when my father died in 2007, and the obituary leads with his career in the military in World War II, decades before I was born, I'm thinking, why? This is not the main thing that people care about. This guy had a life, a big, long life way after that. And that's the kind of thing that they care about. So you can write your own. Just say, this is what I would like to have published, please. And you can make it as funny as you like, or as heartwarming as you like, or as snarky as you like. You want to leave a couple blanks, like, date and place of, or, cause of death, stuff like that. But if you write your own obituary, it can be what you want to say to other people. And I've read a number of these that other people have pre-written for themselves. And some of them are very touching. Some of them are really, really funny. But you're like, okay, now I know something about that person. All right. So I'm sorry for having talked so much longer than I planned on it. I hope I'm not keeping you from doing other important things, but I'm going to end with this one last ad for this book. I hope you will take advantage of it. And if you do have time to stick around and you do have any questions, I'd be very happy to do as best I can to answer them now. Be sure to unmute yourself if you're not already unmuted.
It was very good. I'll speak first. Terrific. I've had a chance to hear Joe speak a number of times in the past. If you go, since you're a member of our organization, which is a member of APCUG, if you go to the apcug2.org website, click on YouTube, you'll be able to go back through and catch a couple more of Joe's presentations, especially you Mac people. He's done a number of Mac presentations for APCUG. So I want to thank you, and I'll turn things back over to Adam.
Yeah, the room mic is now unmuted if anyone here or online wants to speak up and ask a question.
Yes, please.
All right, Mary Frances.
Joe, this is Mary Frances. I am your 85-year-old example in the group.
All right.
You have scared the pajamas off me this afternoon because...
That's scary too.
No, I'm not encouraging nudity here. So just to be clear, I'm not.
Okay. Further, I am not doing almost everything you say I should be doing, and that's not good. However, it has enlightened me to the point where you have now kicked me in the seat of the pants, and I believe that this talk of yours is going to make my son a much happier person. And
That's wonderful.
I'm going to take a lot of your advice, and I do not use a password manager. Could you just suggest to me what a super beginner might see? I have Android. I have Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, see, every operating system and every at least every browser has a password manager of skin, but I don't really recommend those for a number of reasons. The biggest one of which is that if you decide to use a different operating system or a different browser, that's starting to sink across. Now,